The time is now 6:05, and the committee meeting of February 26th Governance and Policy meeting will now come to order. Trustees are reminded that this is a committee. It is the appropriate place for discussion of agenda items before they proceed to the board as applicable. Following presentation of each report, discussion will be open for trustees. We will now do our land acknowledgement. The Durham District School Board acknowledges that many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships, both historic and modern, with the territories upon which our school board and schools are located. Today, this area is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge that the Durham region forms a part of the traditional and treaty territory of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Mississauga peoples, and the treaty territory of the Chippewa of Georgina Island First Nation. It is on these ancestral and treaty lands that we teach, learn, and live. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, may I have a motion to approve the agenda? Thank you, Trustee Jackula. All in favor? That is approved. May we now have a motion to approve the draft minutes of the Governance and Policy meeting of the January 29th, 2025. Thank you, Trustee Edwards. All in favor? Thank you. The minutes are approved. This evening, we have 3 recommended actions, and we will begin. If there is any changes, we will begin with the first recommended action. That is Section A on pages 4 to 6, and I will turn it over to General Counsel Cotter.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Miller. As the Chair noted, the first report can be found at page 4 of your agenda package. Trustees will recall that in light of the new requirements around the Integrity Commissioner and the Board's Code of Conduct, that we did extensive amendments to Appendix 2, which was the complaints protocol, which contained all the provisions around the investigation and reporting by the Integrity Commissioner and the new sanction provisions. However, through oversight, there is a provision in the Code of Conduct that ties into the appendix and the sanctions, which is Section 7. So you'll note on paragraph 6, we're proposing to delete all of paragraph 7.1 and just replace it with the last line that says any alleged breach of this trustee code of conduct is subject to the terms of Appendix 2. Because the prior part about the Integrity Commissioner reporting to the board, etc., is no longer applicable given the terms of Appendix 2. So this now makes sure there's alignment between Appendix 2 and Section 7 of the Code of Conduct. Subject to any questions you may have, that is the report.
Thank you, Counsel Cotter. Is there any trustee willing to move the recommended motion as included in this report? Thank you, Trustee Edwards. This item is now open for discussion, and are there any questions from trustees? I will ask again, are there any questions for trustees? Okay, I'll now turn to the vote. Since there are no questions or no comments, I will now ask trustees to vote. Raise your cards, all in favor of the recommended action. I will ask again, and those online may vote. All in favor to raise their hands or their cards. This motion carries. Thank you. We will now move on to our second recommended action. It is revised bylaws for trustee attendance requirements found on page 7 to 17, and I will turn it over again to General Counsel Cotter.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Miller. So the trustees will recall from the last meeting, we started presenting a framework around the mandatory attendance requirements. And trustees passed, this committee passed a resolution that we develop a separate policy around trustee attendance. So The document that's included at page 9 is the proposed document. Whether it's a policy or part of the consolidated bylaws, I don't think is of much material import. I think we can get to that once we settle on the language. But suffice to say, having some of this in the bylaw and some in a separate policy, I think is problematic. It should all be one document. If we want to say in the bylaws, see the policy, attendance policy that the board has adopted, we could do that and just move whatever the final content is into that, or we can put it in the bylaws. The most important thing is, I think it all has to be in one place, in one document, so that the trustees and the public can find it. So the first issue is making sure that the board has a clear understanding of what a mandatory meeting is. So that's in section 5.7.2. And then, because trustees must attend all mandatory meetings physically. And if they cannot attend physically, they need permission to attend electronically. The exceptions are there listed in 5.7.5. Those were already included. Section 5.7.6 is a new section that says the request shall be treated as having been made by the trustee in good faith and shall be approved if it is based upon one of the circumstances permitting electronic participation as stipulated above. So, in other words, this bylaw, this document would operate on that good faith assumption, unless, as I say, unless there's information to the contrary. But we don't want to be in a situation where each time a request comes in, the chair is emailing the trustee saying, please provide support. What about this? What about that? As I say, unless there's some indication that the chair should look behind it, the request should be assumed to be in good faith. Section 5.7.8 is new, and just making clear that the approval that's granted by the chair or the vice chair, as the case may be, is in relation to electronic attendance, not to be absent from the meeting. Section 5.7.9 confirms that if that's the situation, if it's not about attending electronically, if it's about not being able to attend, that requires a board resolution. That's provided for in section 5.7.9. And then 5.7.13 contains the reference to section 228 of the Education Act that missing 3 mandatory meetings would constitute deem the seat to be vacated. It'd have to be 3 meetings of the same type in a row, and then the seat would be vacated. So that's section 5.7.13. And then the only other change I think I need to flag is 5.7.20, where we've indicated that members participating electronically shall keep their camera on at all times during the meeting. So that is, again, this is draft language. Obviously, the committee and the board ultimately can decide what to do, but based on feedback received from the last draft proposal, I have included that in the draft for your consideration. So those are some of the mechanisms that we've put in place to address the mandatory meeting requirements. And subject to any, I don't want to really get into too much into the definitions of the regular meetings in section 5.7.2 or 5.7.3 until we have a chance to hear some of the comments from the trustees. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm having a bit of concerns around the definitions around committee of the whole and the definition of a regular board meeting. And some of it is not quite consistent through the document, as well as the impact of, although it's a later agenda item, is the Horizon report, because that, you know, when you're a closed session, when you're in the committee of the whole, basically committee of the whole doesn't have the ability to pass motions per se. It's recommendations that come from a committee of the whole, because it's a committee, to the board. And then when you are in closed session, you must rise out of closed session to then report. So I have some concerns about that section particularly, that needs to be cleaned up in order to, and I think it's going to be a bit of a long discussion going through all these, just, you know, the individuals overall. The other comment, though, I also have is that I have a couple of comments on a couple of the other sections, like 5.7.18. We talk about electronic means shall be permitted by all persons, and I know later we talk about public, but at that point in time, and I know you're supposed to read the whole bylaw, but at that point in time, it says all persons participating in the meeting shall be able to communicate with each other simultaneously. It isn't until you get to the public part that it says that only those that have been approved. So it's got to be really clear, because somebody reads that, they're thinking that they can participate until they actually get approval later on. So I'm just making that note that it can be a little, because it's so far down the list afterwards, that they might not put the two together. And then right now it says, you mentioned when you spoke that members attending electronic shall always keep their, but it just says shall keep their camera on during the meeting. I agree that the camera should be on, but I mean, like here, we won't have the opportunity, and I think it's disruptive if they have to put their hand up and say, I want to turn my camera off because I want a personal privilege, you know, sort of thing, because we are on a long meeting or something like that. They don't want to stop this meeting maybe, but they, you know, they might want to turn their camera off at that point in time. So I think the way it is right now is okay. Attending shall keep the camera on during the meeting. I mean, you might want to turn it off briefly for a second. I think that can cover that as well. The way it's currently worded, not all at all times, should not be added to it. And then the only other comment I have is around the physically, about the trustee may seek a board resolution to authorize the absence. I know that in other cases, in other boards, that if a trustee, it might be just after the start of the meeting, or just at like 2 minutes to or a minute to the meeting where some emergency has come up and they've notified, then the chair basically they put a motion right there at that meeting because the chair was notified, and given that saying, oh, you know, trustee so-and-so has notified they cannot attend, and as we've got the parameters there as far as, you know, cannot attend due to it, and it would probably fit in one of those, you know, due to a, you know, a family emergency or whatever, can we automatically then put a motion forward to approve their absence so that they don't have to come back at another date to do that. So it's like when they are notified, but it's kind of an emergency. So to clarify something like that. Those are just my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards, and through you, Chair Miller. So I think the language in 5.7.9, I think it says the trustee may seek. So it doesn't say that a trustee may move. So I think the way it's worded, it does not require that trustee to bring the motion personally. If the trustee was to email for, as you say, the chair, say, I'm seeking a resolution, can somebody bring it forward? I think that would allow that. The language is broad enough to allow that. Thank you for your comments on 5.7.18. I will make that change and come back to the committee. And I agree with your comments on 5.7.20, that language would allow, I think, a point of personal privilege. for the camera to be off temporarily if there was an issue. Dealing with your comments on the attendance requirements and the definition of regular board meeting and committee of the whole meeting and the tie-in with rise and report, I do agree that there's potential for, there is an incongruity between how we're going to treat rise and report and how we're going to treat the attendance requirements and the provisions of the bylaw. So I do think, and my suggestion to the committee is that I would like to do a little bit more work on the definition of regular board and regular committee meeting to make sure that it's aligned with the bylaws, the other sections of the bylaws, and the rise and report provisions as well. So I would invite the committee, if anyone has any comments sort of on the other sections, sort of 5.73 forward. I obviously would welcome those comments, but I would like an opportunity to go back and do a little further more development on 5.7.2, how we're defining those meetings and how that does tie in with rising reporting, whether it's one meeting or two meetings, and how we're going to set that up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Cotter. Are there any further comments or discussion from trustees online? Seeing none, I do have a comment for section 5.7.2. Considering Trustee Edwards' comments, I do think that the section where it says members attending electronically shall keep their cameras on, I did question whether it could deem a little bit restrictive. For instance, there could be circumstances where that's not possible and it might seem restrictive to have that included in the wording. However, I do recall in previous discussions that the consideration was for voting purposes. So for everyone to be clear, if there's a voting member, that their camera is kept on. Just wanted to present that as an option. I don't know how that fits with other members' viewpoints, but I do consider not having a statement that says consistently, like they always have to have their cameras on, but for the purpose of voting, I do see that relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Miller, what I might suggest is if I added before that last sentence, subject to a point of personal privilege, comma, members attending electronically shall keep their camera on. Therefore, if a member said at the start of the meeting, Chair, point of personal privilege, I'm at home, but I have to be in whatever, this particular room, and for this following reason, I really can't keep my camera on, I will turn it on during voting. May I please have, permission to do that? The chair would say yes. That's fine. So I think if we say subject to a point of personal privilege, if there's a reason why the person can only put it on during voting, then the chair can grant that as needed. So that's my suggestion on that provision. That way the default is it's always on. If there's some specific reason, it gets raised as a point of personal privilege. Thank you.
Recognizing Vice Chair Jackula.
Thank you. My position on the camera is I think it should always be on, that we are elected officials and we're at a meeting, it's public. There's no reason why a camera can't be on except for limited circumstances as described by Council Cotter, so I have no issue with that being added, but I think the default should always be that we are on camera, we're representatives of the people, and it's a personal point of mine. I don't ever see why you'd be on a meeting and not have your camera on, so I think that the exception that he's created is going to be sufficient for that, but the default should always be having your camera.
Thank you, Vice Chair Jackula. Any further comments or questions from trustees? Seeing none, I would like now to now we'd like to move to the next item, which is my motion coming from myself. So I would like to ask my vice chair to take my position, and I will move to the next position so that my vice chair can direct the rest of this section. Thank you.
So thank you, Chair Miller. The next item under 6.C is a motion request for report on bullying by Trustee Miller.
I have a motion to present, and the motion states that staff prepare an information report to the committee on any and all DDSB policies, procedures, directives, guidelines, and practices related to bullying, as well as the DDSB's compliance with legislative requirements regarding bullying in schools, so that the committee may assess and determine, 1, if there are any policy gaps, and or 2, if there may be any policy improvements that could be made as to the transparency, reporting, and responsiveness to impacted students and families.
So is there any discussion on Trustee Miller's motion? One moment, Trustee Edwards. We are going to go to Trustee Miller.
Thank you, Chair Dracula. Bullying contributes to a toxic culture that harms the overall environment of our schools. More so, repetitive accounts of bullying impact well-being is related to lower levels of engagement and achievement of our students. We are well aware that incidents of bullying have increased within our district. Today, I intend to speak openly and honestly about these concerns and responses of the students and families in our communities. The prevention of bullying is the responsibility of the whole school community. Therefore, I'd like to acknowledge the efforts of our staff and school teams for their efforts to keep our schools safe. However, we have received several reports of concerns from parents and families that ask the questions, with the measures we have in place, are we doing enough? Is there other ways to approach this problem? I have sat, considered, consulted, listened to, cried with, and realized that this motion is more than just requesting a report. It is taking a proactive approach to an issue that has lifelong impacts. I tried not to personalize it, but my compassion would not allow it. There are those of us who sit in this very room and those viewing at home who have experienced the long-term mental health impacts of ongoing bullying. There are also some of us who wish we could have intervened sooner, but unfortunately missed the mark. I see this as an opportunity for us not to critique what's already done, but for us to shift the lens to what we can do, but what we can prevent. Not only what we can do, but what we can prevent. Again, the responses raise the question, where can our board improve strategies with feedback and changing dynamics? How can we support our schools in rejecting bullying behavior and promote the skills to manage relationships in a way that does not harm others? What have we learned from previous incidents? What patterns or trends are emerging? I am optimistic that as a board, we can and will continue looking for new approaches to promote a culture of respect and kindness. We will continue the same level of regard and will not make excuses nor minimize the voices of the people we serve.
Thank you, Trustee Miller, and I know Trustee Edwards, did you still wish to speak?
So I know that we've received from Safe Schools sort of a list previously of some of the programs and so forth, but what I, and sort of what is being done, and as you said, it's not so much about what is being done, but it's from the proactive sort of point of view. I'm just I still, when we say an information report to the committee on all DDS procedures, are you looking like just a list and what they say as far as that's concerned, what they deal with, in order so that we can look at the policy gaps? Or are you looking at, something a little bit more detailed? I just want to get an idea of the scope here, Trustee Miller.
So what I'll do is we'll have Trustee Miller respond, and I do see that we have a hand raised by Trustee Linton first, and then we'll get to Trustee Cunningham as well. I just wanted to acknowledge that we see you there.
Thank you for your question, Trustee Edwards. At this point, I think that the motion is broad enough and inclusive enough to allow for our school team staff to look at what we already are currently working with, and between that discussion, perhaps they will identify areas of improvement, whether that looks like feedback responses, it looks like numbers or charts. I think I will leave that broader purview to the staff. However, at some point, I think once the report is provided, I think we can have a further discussion that looks into implementation or effectiveness of the policies that we currently have. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Trustee Miller, and we'll now turn to Trustee Linton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Definitely appreciate this motion coming forward. Over the last couple of weeks, both Trustee Cunningham and I have received lots of emails about situations that are happening in some of our schools in Pickering. And so we do see how this intensifies. And we also see the impact that it has on the broader community. And I've always stated that even though an incident happens in the school, it has impacts on the broader community. So when we talk about addressing these incidents, we're talking about how it impacts safety for the broader community. Oops. I guess my question is, and as I have comments about how it's being done, but we do have the Violence in Schools working group. And one of the commitments of the next iteration of this work, and I believe there's a meeting happening later on this week, I think Friday, is around seeking the input of parents and the community around their experience around violence. So yeah, I know this is very specific to bullying, but there's more of a spectrum, right? So I guess I'm just trying to understand where I think this report is important. I'm trying to identify, how we could time this so the report comes forward at a time where we have been able to solicit information intentionally from parents. And I would say that's including some of the parents, myself and Trustee Cunningham and other trustees I've heard from, to feed into their experience with the school dealing with situations of violence and bullying, and how that can mesh with the report that you're requesting to move forward.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. And we'll just have Trustee Miller just respond to that, and then we'll get to Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. I think that is a great point. You did mention the feedback of our families and parents in this information report, and you did mention about the plans within the anti-violence work group. I think that is good to note, and I would hope that this would be included. I would leave that for staff to implement in the process of their report. Definitely seeking feedback from our communities is one way to see how we are doing. So I would agree with that, and I would leave that to staff to include that in the report.
Thank you, Trustee Miller, and we'll now turn to Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Trustee Linton touched on some of what I was hoping to say because, as he mentioned, I've gotten some of the same emails that he has with parental concerns. I am in support of this motion, and I have two reasons why I think this report will be valuable. One is to identify any policy gaps, as Trustee Miller suggested, but the other thing is that one thing I've noticed from a lot of parents is that they don't believe that the bully is being disciplined. And we know that, of course, bullies are being disciplined, but you're never going to know what another student might be getting disciplined with. You're never going to be privy to information about another child. And I think a report like this would be really helpful to be able to refer parents to and say, I can't tell you what's being done with your child's bully specifically, but here are some of the ways that the school board addresses it in general so that you can get a sense of how these things are dealt with. And I think that will give parents a lot of confidence if we have a document we can refer them to so they can understand how the school board does react to bullying and some of the things that might be being done, even if they don't know the specific things that may happen to their child's bully. So I think this report will be really valuable from both perspectives, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Cunningham. I'll just say I definitely agree with your second point. A lot of the concerns we get as trustees is what's happened to the individual that's bullied my son or daughter, and the more information we can give, the better. So I think that's a great point. And now we will turn to Trustee Oldfield.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, Vice Chair, actually. I support the motion. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to go about this because I do see some overlap with the Violence in Schools Committee. And I think Trustee Linton spoke to that, and there's this feeling about, and I don't know if that was actually an amendment, but this idea that the feedback from parents and students would be included. And I mean, that is what's happening through the working group and coming back through the ad hoc committee. So is there a better way to go about this? And actually, when I look at this, a lot of this information is information that staff has pulled together already for that working group. And so is this motion appropriate? I'm just trying to figure out a way to streamline it, put it through the Violence in Schools ad hoc committee because it's part and parcel of that, I would say, because when I'm looking at the policies, procedures, what's the legislation, that is information that we have been looking at. And so I just don't want to be duplicating work. And if there's a more streamlined way to do that, I'd be open to some ideas from staff, what the best way to go about that would be, because if we do this here, and I don't want to take away from this motion, but at the same time, it is, a lot of this is going to be coming back through that committee. Anyway, that's my...
Thank you, Trustee Oldfield, and through you, Chair. Might I recommend that it is quite a hefty motion, and so I think that what might come back from the staff would be a proposal to the trustees around how it is that we might want to engage in the development of this report, because this report could be anything from a one-pager with 15 appendices, which won't tell you a lot, or there could be intersections with existing committees. There is a report coming forward on Monday standing committee that is in fact on positive school climates and some of the initiatives that are already being undertaken. So there are a variety of ways. So what I would recommend is that we take the motion away and that we can come back to trustees with a plan for how it is we want to undertake this report, because I would go as far as to say that you wouldn't see this report until the fall, because of the nature of the report, but we don't want people to feel that this is something that is not being taken seriously. So I think the next step would be to earmark when we can bring a plan for you as to how it is we are proposing to deal with the motion. And once that has been responded to and approved and confirmed by trustees, then we'll undertake to do the work with some agreed upon timelines.
And we'll go back to trustee Miller, and I do see trustee Linton has his hand up. Is that another comment you want to make? Because I can get to you after trustee Miller.
It is, yes, thank you.
All right, we'll get to you in a sec.
I really appreciate the suggestion brought forward by Director Williams-Taylor. I do think that it will be comprehensive. Ultimately, this is definitely something that is a priority, as it sounds like from our community. I think that there is room for us to do this collaboratively and have a clear understanding of what direction we want to take. Essentially, we're really looking at, for my purview, is the effectiveness of our policies. We know that we have things in place. We have even new reporting measures. I've even went on our website and I've seen them. We do have work that we have done. The question is not that we have things in place, it's we want to respond to our communities and families and answer their questions so that we are clear and that they feel that we have undertaken this issue in a way that enhances the well-being of our school community. So I agree with Director Williams-Taylor's suggestion, and I would support that.
Thank you, trustee Miller. We'll now turn to trustee Linton.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. Whereas I agree with the comments, over the last, few weeks, months, I've kind of gone back and looked at past archive videos of some of the board meetings. And one of the comments that I, kept hearing frequently from former trustee Lundquist was around a lack of sense of urgency around very important matters. So in that same vein, I'm going to do the same, because what I just heard is fall, right? And I understand that this is a hefty report, but that essentially means for us, we go through this year, we go through potentially a conversation around budget, we go through this document and, all this work that this committee is doing, and then we get a report in fall, and then we can't necessarily do anything about it until January, which means that we're going to have parents who are currently struggling with the information around how bullying and violence in school is being treated, and essentially we aren't going to be able to do anything about it in this term, right? That is what the numbers equate to when you say, okay, fall, that's fall 2025, January 2026, and then we start to, determine what our next steps is. So as much as I agree, I'm pushing back on the timeline on this, and I really would encourage us as a board to see the sense of urgency, because we have parents pulling their children out of school because they feel that the school isn't keeping their child safe. And I know there's lots of factors and there's lots of complexities to this, but when we talk about feelings such as my child got the sonic rings knocked out of them, right? Just as a way of trying to describe what their child has gone through, it doesn't sit right that we really don't get to move or vote or, write letters in defense and change for potentially a year. So I'm wondering if through these conversations and, our next steps, we can look at making this a priority and speeding up the timelines. Thank you.
If there's no other discussion and I don't see any notifications or hands up, I think it's time that we'll call for a vote on the motion as is. All in favor, if you could, if you're in the room, raise your check mark, and online, if you can raise a hand. And that motion carries. Thank you very much, and I'll now turn the power back to Chair Miller.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dracula. We'll now continue the rest of our meeting, and now we will go to our information discussion items. The first is our trustee expense policy. If there are any...
I'm sorry, Trustee Miller, because there was a point made about the timelines and speeding them up, and it was silence. So I understand that we've moved on, and this is probably not the way to do it. But again, I'm going to lean into the sense of urgency and request that, you know, do we have feedback around this coming back before fall?
Thank you, Trustee Linton. I just want to say that there was no motion put forward, but I took that as a suggestion.
Okay.
So
All right.
I took that as a suggestion for the committee that is going to bring that. Is there any, can we just have a moment, please? I'm going to consult Council Carter. Okay, in your response to Trustee Linton, I'm going to call Director Camille Williams-Taylor to respond.
Certainly, through you, Chair. So the motion passed as it stands. It was not amended in any way. We can commit that we will take an approach to presenting the trustees with a plan. Because my consideration is that should we simply interpret what the motion says, bring forward a report based on our interpretation, it may not in fact meet the needs or the perspectives that the trustees have. So if at the point where we do bring forward a plan and there's a consideration around timeline, that what that could look like is that there are aspects of the reporting that might be broken down in order to speed up the timeline. But taken as a whole, unless there are aspects of our work that trustees would like us to stop doing, in order to pull the resources together to be able to expedite this. My suggestion is that we would bring a plan forward to you, and we would be able to do that within probably by the next board meeting, which is in March. And at that point, if we have approval or input or direction around how it is you want us to proceed, then you would have the opportunity to weigh in to give us that. But otherwise, if we are forced to move in an expeditious manner, we might be able to deliver a report, but not really can guarantee that it will deliver the information that it is that you're looking for. So I think that the opportunity to be able to clarify, to streamline, to collaboratively engage with you, so that we all are on the same page about the way forward might be the most expeditious way to get this completed.
Okay, I mean, I think you said something around looking at the work that you're doing and working out if there's a priority and if this takes it. So I look forward to having that conversation, looking at what we have on the books over the next few weeks and the months that staff are doing, and working out if this can now move to the top of that list, or if the work, everything that else is happening, needs to stay as is. But again, worst case, this may be coming back to the next governance meeting, because I think we got to lean into this, and I don't believe that we have been. So
thank
coming
you.
to a governance meeting near you soon.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. I appreciate the points, and thank you, thank you, Director Camille Williams-Taylor, for further following up with the question. At this time, we will now move on to item 7, which is our information and discussion items. I will turn over to General Counsel Patrick Carter for the trustee expense policy.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Miller. The report can be found at page 19 of the package, and the policy, the relevant policy is at page 20 of the package and forward. The report and the policies provide for information. There was some indication that trustees might have an interest in considering the terms of the policy, and we don't have any direction in terms of presenting revisions or presenting a more detailed information report. So this is a fairly generic first step. But certainly if trustees have questions or points of discussion, we can engage in that. And I have asked David Wright to attend as well today, and he is here, recognizing, of course, that we don't have specific direction, but we're happy to have some sort of general discussion to kick off any further consideration the committee might wish to undertake. Thank you.
Okay, I'm recognizing Trustee Edwards.
Thank you. And looking at other basically trustee expense policies and policies, particularly around discretionary funding and PD and so forth, our policy is a little lacking at this point in time. I think that you need an overall policy around professional development that basically reflects our strategic goals somewhere that is, and there's a frame, and then there's also requiring a framework on how we make a decision to basically have we as a board make a decision to approve professional development. So there's that whole thing. And then also when we look at some of the policies that exist, and I'm considering the ministry just basically of education just basically provided a memo on what they identify as the 4 topics of professional development for trustees, and this is information that I was going to bring up as a result of an OPSPA meeting, that OESC has been given money to update basically the good governance modules, board modules online. And with that, the funds are through a transfer payment, and of course there's an agreement. And the agreement basically has said that they want to see focus on the professional development around mediation and conflict resolution, financial management and governance, effective community engagement to promote student achievement, and then Director of Education Performance Appraisal. And so, and they will also be offering 2 ways of getting that. And then one of the whole thing is that it'll be the online modules will have a certificate of completion. And it was noted that that the Ministry of Education will be provided the tracking of how many trustees actually complete the online modules. So expect something change in the future as far as, so we have to look at regulations and as far as that, as well as public sector expenses, and look at sort of that as well, because I know that there are with restraint funding, we have to take into that consideration. So there's a lot that I would say that we need to look at as far as this expense policy from that point of view. And then we can get into budgets as far as that is what we're going to basically approve as far as expensive, and then say what can we approve as far as budgets is concerned. That's the second thing, because we can all say that we want to add $10,000 to the PD, but we won't have that money because we're at that point in time. So Ray, it's just like putting the framework together needs to be done first around expense policy, making sure it reflects our strategic plan, making sure that it reflects current public sector practices and all those things. Thank you.
Recognize Trustee Linton.
the unmute button is not always easy to find. And through you, Chair. Yeah, just kind of echoing Trustee Edwards' thoughts, mainly around the professional development policy. And I think, you know, in a former meeting, Trustee Miller kind of pioneered something important in terms of being able to identify in training and capacity building sessions that allow us to better understand, work with, support and advocate for our students in terms of the mental health first aid training that she'll be taking. And we've had discussions around the current professional development funds being inadequate. I know there's a great deal of conversation being had around these funds and being conscious and careful and, you know, not misusing. But I do feel that it's an important conversation for us to have in terms of amending the amount. I think there's an over-reliance on OBSPA to create training, learning, and capacity building sessions, as well as sometimes our own board trustee development or professional development. And I think, you know, that's a lofty expectation. And I don't think in the past years it's hit the mark. We haven't had any in-depth conversations on things like mental health. We haven't had any in-depth conversations on safety and well-being in the school. But there are lots of service providers. There are lots of, you know, community members out in the Durham community that could provide this information. So I'm hoping, and let me not make the mistake that I made last time, if I need to put forth a motion to request or discuss the increase to the professional development budget for trustees. So if that requires a motion, I'm happy to do so, but we'll look towards Council Carter or any staff in the room to lead the way for this discussion.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. I will move to Donna Edwards to respond or share her comment.
I'm just sharing my comments in that when it comes to this, is that the overall expenses, I mean, I think it's premature to actually look at increasing a fund where we don't even know and we don't even have the framework to just what kind of PD we're going to do, and then especially and how it fits into our strategic plan and the role, the understanding of the role of trustees and so forth. I think that's a little bit premature at this time. It's a sort of the horse, you know, the cart before the horse. I think that if anything, I would say that this requires a jurisdictional scan of current policies and see we're there, plus the ministry now regulate memos that talk about PD training and professional development at this point in time, and so that we can look at putting a proper policy together around PD if we decide it's a separate policy around PD, and then the trustees' expenses. I think that if anything, we can't as a governance committee recommend an ad hoc. It would have to come, but I would say that that's really a working group or somewhere a working group to get that information together so that we can then make a policy. I really, because there's a lot to an expense policy. It's not in professional development. So I think that that's a little bit premature for any type of motion at this point in time. We have to collect that information to understand.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Before I move to Trustee Linton, I'd like some clarification from Council Carter. I'm hearing various points that I'm not really clear, and I'm just wondering if you can kind of clarify for me.
No, I think, you know, the intention of this report was really to kick off the discussion. And, you know, I think what we're hearing is that there's likely going to be a motion for to come back with a report. So I think, you know, and I think we have enough clarity, you know, that the report would cover sort of sources of funding for expenses in PD and the current framework for PD. So I think I think, Chair, if you were to ask if someone was prepared to bring a motion for a report to come back on the general funding for professional development and the existing sort of process and framework for covering that, and any further information such as jurisdictional scans on other policies and around professional development and expenses related to professional development. I think that's a report that we could come back. We'd be happy to prepare and come back. I don't know, David, if you think we need any more specifics around that, or if that type of motion would work.
Thanks, Council Cotter, and through you, Madam Chair. I think that works, and I do think respectfully there's a little bit of time, given that the budget for 2024-2025 has already been established. So presumably this would be for the 25-26 budget year, and we're just getting into those conversations now. So there's a little bit of time to inform trustees on this before a decision's made.
Thank you, Associate David Wright. I will now turn back to Trustee Linton.
Yeah, I'm through you, Chair. I somewhat agree. I don't think there's two discussions. So whereas I appreciate Trustee Edwards' comments around creating a framework and looking at the reports, I'm looking at the reality of what we faced over the last couple of years, and ultimately thinking again through Trustee Cunningham's, my own, Trustee Brown's, Trustee Panello's experience. We ultimately could pick one thing, and then that would essentially exhaust our professional development funds. And then we had to look ultimately for OBSPA to do the thing that we need. And again, I just think time after time, it just hasn't been there. To the point where I believe in our next expense report, you're probably going to see little to no funds used to engage in OBSPA activities for many trustees. Again, this waiting thing is challenging. I understand process and the need to follow through, but I think just, let's start to move the needle on this. Not once have we done any training on anti-Asian hate, but there's been training that's been offered, for a nominal fee. We haven't necessarily spoken about our Tamil community or the Sri Lankan community, but there are training opportunities and engagement opportunities to engage in that work, and they are part of our community. So, I struggle to think that I can pick one given the breadth and depth and diversity of our school, and would lean into us having those conversations as per AD Wright. So we do have more options. And as we start to think about the next iteration of trustees, whether it's the same faces you see or new, giving them options in terms of how they build the capacity to understand the work, to understand this community, to, advocate properly, understand the challenges and who our students and our families are.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. I will now turn to Director Camille Williams-Taylor to comment.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This board has been very engaged in professional learning, and has indeed offered a lot of direction to staff around the kind of professional learning that they wanted to engage. And so over the course of the last 18 months, we know that there has been robust offerings of a variety of natures, including the human rights, aspects of human rights, identity, understanding identity and the role of governance in supporting various identities in schools. In addition to that, a number of sessions around business and governance as suggested and supported by trustees. And this Board of Trustees has been very actively engaged in attending and investing in that learning, and many times alongside the senior staff. So much so that this Board of Trustees has also engaged in and approved a framework for trustee professional learning. One meeting has already occurred with that working group. There are 4 representatives on that group. And that group has in fact had the opportunity to add and give more direction to staff around professional learning opportunities, which the staff has undertaken for the rest of this year. And there are dates upcoming for that working group to engage to give staff direction around trustee PD coming up for the fall and then again in the spring of next year. So certainly to Trustee Linton's point, this Board of Trustees has certainly invested a great deal in directing their own learning, has undertaken it, and as staff, we've appreciated the direction in being able to support trustees in that learning, and we certainly have moved forward in formalizing it by creating a framework that has been endorsed by this board. We're always happy to take further direction and to whether draw from external resources or bringing from our internal expertise opportunities for trustees to continue to sharpen their expertise.
Thank you, Director Williams-Taylor. I will now turn to Trustee Linton.
Stephen's fine. And through you, Chair, I absolutely am appreciative of the training and the energy and efforts that's gone in to the professional development. I think it's been reflective of our requests and of our needs and made, valid attempts to cover an array of topics to ensure that, we have an understanding of the policies, the processes, the procedures, and our students. In saying that, though, we could always do more. And again, I commend Chair Miller for what she's doing and identifying the training that isn't currently available or hasn't been made available to us as we start to look at the impacts of mental health, right, and that on our students. So it's not to say that we haven't done enough, but the point I'm raising is we could do more. To the comment around the working group, again, I took part in that conversation, and again, I'm appreciative. But again, the next meeting isn't until, I think you mentioned, fall, right? So, throughout the summer, we have some time. We break in June, we have July, we have August. There are opportunities for additional learning that we could, utilize that time to go and take additional professional development. But like I said, I think just the conversation for me, it's kind of you pick one and that's the end of it. So again, this is not to diminish the work that has been done. It's not to diminish the energies and efforts of the board and the staff in bringing this forward, but it's to say that there have been opportunities and we've taken advantage of those opportunities to do more. And I think as, elected into these positions, we should be. Where we can, we should lean into this and we should have better understandings and add to that knowledge by seeking additional knowledge. So thank you for that time. Back to you, Chair Miller.
Thank you, Trustee Linton. I do hear your points of view, and I do consider the points raised by Trustee Edwards. Considering the time frame we're in and with government legislations and the eyes and the purview of expenses and spending overall, I definitely see that there is a need for us to focus and prioritize our professional development. I won't overshare my opinions. However, I do think it's important that we are in a position that prepares us for the right next steps. So I'm going to move to the suggestion that Council Cotter had provided, and I'm going to read the suggestion motion that he provided, which is for staff to prepare a report on sources of PD and PD funding and the PD framework, as well as a jurisdictional scan of PD policies and expenses or funding for that PD. At this time, is there anyone willing to move that motion? Trustee Edwards. Thank you for moving the motion. Okay, at this time, the motion's moved. We can now take a vote. Can I have cards in favor of this motion online? Can we raise our cards for the motion in favor? That motion is approved. Thank you, committee. For a fulsome discussion, we will now move to the next information item, that is our committees rising and reporting, and I will turn it over to General Counsel Cotter.
Thank you, Chair Miller, and through you. Given the discussion we had around the attendance bylaws, I'm going to go away with this report and come back with that in conjunction with the other report on the mandatory attendance. So this report will be returned for the next meeting. So with your leave, Chair Miller, I'd like to proceed just to the next agenda item, if that's okay.
Thank you, Council Cotter. Can I have support from the committee on this? It's approved. Can we go to, we'll turn to item C, bylaws, cycle and scheduling of board and standing committee meetings, and I will turn to you again, Council Cotter.
Thank you. So as we start thinking about the summer break and return to school next year, there has been an issue that's been raised by to come to this committee for consideration, which is what do we do about the standing committee that falls on the first day back to school after Labor Day. So the language as it exists around the scheduling for standing committee meetings is set out in section 4.2.4 of the consolidated bylaws, which can be found at page 26 of the report. And I'm suggesting some additional language to section 4.2.4 to allow for sufficient flexibility around that meeting. So I'm amending the proposing to amend the second sentence of 4.2.4 and adding some additional language so that it would now say, should any regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole standing fall on a statutory, civic, or school holiday, the meeting will be scheduled to be held on the Tuesday of the same week or the Monday of the following week, as the board may deem appropriate when it approves the annual calendar of meetings, subject to the fact that the September meeting may not be scheduled for the first day of school. So that is a suggestion to just alleviate that, that issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Council Cotter. Are there any comments and questions from trustees at this time? Recognizing Trustee Edwards.
Thank you, and I didn't write down the section, but in our current bylaws, it actually allows us to move a meeting, so without that. So we really don't have to add that language. If we as a board decide that the first day of school, all we have to do is say that, bring a motion saying we want to move the board meeting of such and such to, and pick a date, sort of thing, because it doesn't always happen, and do that, At this point in time, like for this one, it can be covered.
Thank you, and through you, Chair Miller. I agree, but I think what happens is when the calendar gets set, it doesn't, it's set without specifically considering that. So the intent of doing this was just so that it's there, so when the annual calendar gets booked, that meeting will be put on the, if it falls on the Labor Day, will be put to the Monday of the week following. But yes, certainly for this September meeting, a motion can just be brought to move the meeting. So that's absolutely correct, but this way it would be standardized going forward. So I think we can probably have a belt and suspenders approach and can put this in place whenever and still bring a motion to move that existing meeting.
Thank you, Council Cotter. I'm turned to Trustee Cunningham.
Thank you, and through you, Chair, I think it is important to move that September meeting. I think staff has a busy enough day without having to come to a board meeting that evening. I think also there are a lot of parents on this board who might like to celebrate the first day back to school with their children. I would like to move that we accept the 4.2.4 as presented by Council Cotter. While I agree with Trustee Edwards that we could just make a motion to change the 1st September without language like this, we would have to do it repeatedly every year. And this sets it up for the future. So I would move that we accept 4.2.4.
Yeah, and just one point of clarification. I think you will need a motion for this year, because this will speak to the annual calendar that gets set in November. So I think you will also need a motion for this year, so you may want to do that now. Obviously, that'll have to be a motion at board. So you may just wait to defer it to the board meeting, but this is obviously appropriate for governance to deal with the bylaws. But you will at some point need a motion to move that meeting as well for this year.
I'm happy to move both, but this is the one that I've moved currently.
Correct. Thank you.
Point of clarification, I just would like to know, based on the section 4.2.4, as Council Carter just suggested, is it that we would need a motion for the current year, and then each subsequent year we would have to make a new motion?
No, so the the idea would be that now when the calendar gets set, it'll be set in accordance with 4.2.4, which would mean that if the meeting is going to fall on the first day of school, the calendar that would come to you for approval at the organizational meeting would have that meeting on the Monday following.
Thanks for the clarification. Trustee Cunningham, are you willing to move your motion? Make your motion?
Yes, I did. I moved that we accept 4.2.4.
Thank you. As amended. Okay, now we will call the vote. Can I see all those in favor and online? That motion carries. Now we will move to our last section. It is...
Apologies, Trustee Miller. May I also have the opportunity to move a motion to move it for September of this year?
I think, Trustee Cunningham, I did flag it, but I think actually it's really not, we've dealt with the appropriate amendment at this committee. My suggestion would be we'll get that on a board agenda for you, and you can move it just straight to board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, and we will now move to our final item. That is the bylaws report on abstention, and I'll turn again to General Counsel Cotter.
Thank you very much. So just wanted to bring some clarity to what it means when a member abstains from voting. Our bylaw provides in section 5.11.9 that a member who is present and fails to vote on a motion will be deemed to have abstained from voting. So that means that if your hand doesn't go up, you know, you've failed to vote, you'll be deemed to have abstained, which means your vote doesn't count. What that also means is that you've reduced the denominator of what's required to reach majority. So abstaining from a vote makes it more likely that the motion will pass. So if you are abstaining because you don't like the motion, your abstention will more likely lead to the motion passing. So I think we just wanted to make that clear. Our present practice of most chairs is that whether somebody's in person or online, they're not, unless it's a recorded vote, they're not asking a member if they're meaning to vote and not voting, if they're abstaining, etc. And most times, of course, that's not material because it's usually not a close vote on most matters. Where it's a close vote, trustees do have, any trustee has the option, as do student trustees, to call for a recorded vote, in which case each member is called through the roll of the members, and each member can then have a recorded vote. So that's the current lay of the land, and that's the provision of the bylaw that's relevant. So that's just provided to the committee for your consideration today or in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Cotter. Are there any questions or further discussion from trustees on this item? Trustee Edwards.
You know, there's a reason why I brought this book here, right? As far as, again, and I agree with sort of the interpretation, and I also looked at the Robert's Rules of Order, which we basically follow. And then it does, you know, we purposely have in our language those present and voting. So as Councillor Cotter basically had mentioned is that it does reduce if somebody abstains. In Robert's Rules of Order, it actually says that a chair does not call, under 44.9A, a chair does not call for abstentions in taking a vote. In usual situations, the rule requires either a majority vote or a 2/3 vote. Abstentions have no effect on the outcome, as you said, to the vote, since what is required is either a majority or 2/3 of those present and voting. And then an abstention does matter when the rule explicitly requires a majority of 2/3 if we said members present, but we say present and voting, which is the difference. And then it says, and in a recorded vote, abstentions are recorded, but an abstention is recorded as a no. That's just according to Robert's Rules of Order. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Edwards. Any further comments or questions on this item from trustees? Seeing none, that concludes our final item. At this time, I would like to ask if there is a mover to adjourn this meeting. Thank you, Trustee Dracula. All in favor? The meeting is now adjourned.